In this video, I'm going to walk through how I would approach and solve the first few problems on our geometry practice. Now, one thing to be aware of in these solution videos, as well as in my solution key, you should be summarizing your answer in a sentence, or some of the explanations I may give you verbally and not actually write down. The expectation, though, of course, since you are turning in a physical paper, is that you would actually write down a sentence or have a written explanation. But just sort of keep that in mind. And we'll be doing some of that problem solving, sort of what would be good work framework as we sort of work through some of these problems. So we'll be thinking about what are we being asked to find, what information do we know, what formulas do we think we're going to need to use, and those sorts of things. So let's just dive right in on this first problem. So we have a circular patio. So I bet that word circular is going to be key. With a circumference, ooh, interesting word there, of approximately 39 feet. You plan to tile the patio with tile that costs $216 per square foot, so some expensive tile. And typically with the tile you want to buy, we're going to buy 10% extra, and that's just to ensure, like, when you only need parts of a tile, or if a tile breaks, you have enough tile. And so then we want to figure out the cost. So the goal is the total cost to tile the patio. So always a good idea to make sort of a note of what are we trying to find. And let's sort of list out some of the things we know. So it's given. We know the circumference, and I'm going to use C, equals 39 feet. I know the cost is $216 per square foot. And I know I'm going to need 10% extra. So I'm just writing down everything I know. All right, so we have a circular patio. So that means we have a circle. And we're given the circumference. So I'm going to just make a note. I know that circumference is equal to either pi times the diameter or 2 pi radius. And I think I'm going to want 2 pi radius because I see I have square feet, and when I'm tiling, I'm covering, an entire surface of an object, which would be an area. So I'm probably going to want the area formula, which would be pi r squared, which is then why I want the 2 pi r formula of circumference, because they each have the radius in it. So we know that the circumference is equal to 39 feet. So let's figure out what the radius of our patio would be. So if we know it equals the circumference, that would be, just so you remember, and I'm going to sort of highlight it, the circumference would be the distance around the edge. That's our perimeter of our patio, is 39 feet. And then, so we're going to go in here, 39 equals 2 pi r. So I would divide out that 2 pi to get r by itself. And using your calculator, and we're just going to practice this. So I'm going to open up Desmos. This is a Desmos scientific calculator. When I'm doing just some basic calculations on my tablet or even a computer, I might use this one over the Desmos graphing because I don't need the graph features right now. And so I want to do 39 divided by 2 pi. And as we mentioned in class, you can use the pi button or 3.14. I'm going to use the pi button. And so I'm coming out with about 6.207, or I'm just going to round that to the nearest hundredth. And yes, you're perfectly okay rounding. So r equals 6.21 feet. So there's my radius. Now I need to know how much area I have. So I'm going to use that radius length, and I'm going to go plug that into my area formula. So sort of this was my first step. Now I'm going to move on, and I'm going to find my area. So area equals pi, and that's 6.21 squared. Now here's the reality. I'm going to go back to my calculator here, and I'm going to actually use this answer in my next problem. So I'm going to have 2, and then not 2, I'm doing the wrong formula, pi, and then I want to pull my answer. So notice I just hit the answer button, and so it pulled my previous answer, and I want to square that. So I hit the square button, and I get 121.04 approximately. So an area equals approximately 121.04 square feet. And again, depending on if you used a rounded value, that number might differ slightly. All right, so we're told we want 10% of extra tile. And I need to figure out that extra tile amount before I do the cost. Now, the key when you're dealing with percents like this is that I actually want, and what I sort of think about, and I'm going to change colors here just sort of keep track of what I'm doing, is you actually want 100% plus the 10%. So I'm looking for 110% of the area that I have right here. So to do that, to get basically 110% of 121, I would take my 100, so I'm going to call this total tiles. I would take that area I had, and whenever I do percents, it's the percent out of 100. And yes, it's over 100%, and that's okay. And 110 over 100, if you're thinking about it as a decimal, would be actually 1.1. And I'm going to put that into my calculator. So I'm going to go to my next line. I'm going to pull my answer, and I'm going to times that by 110 divided by 100. And notice it's about, 12 extra tiles. So I'm going to be buying 133.14. So 133.14 square feet of tile. So I'm going to actually label this in square feet. Now, that's not my final answer. This is just step 3, and I'm starting to run out of space. So I'm going to erase a little bit of my givens just to free up some room. Because now I'm going to take my, so last but not least, I'm going to take my cost times my square feet, because it's cost per square foot. So I'm going to have that 133.14 times it by the 216. And I wasn't asked to give, to deal with tax, so I'm going to sort of not worry about tax right now. And so let's go back, just like we've been doing all along. We're going to go to our calculator, and I'm going to pull my answer and then times it by the 216 I pay per square foot, and I go, holy cow, $28,758.47. That's a lot. So the cost is $28,758.47. And a good problem would also sort of put my answer in a sentence. So in order to tile my circular patio, it would cost me $28,758.47. And the moral of that story is find some cheaper tile. But hopefully this gives you a sense of how I can deal with figuring out the amount of square footage of tile I would need given a fixed area that I'm tiling. All right, one last problem on this page. So Sean, my son, is looking to plant a rose garden in his backyard. And in this particular rose garden, it's going to be the shape of a 9-foot by 18-foot rectangle. Keep in mind that little tick mark is foot, with a depth of 1 foot. He's going to fill 93% of it with soil. Now, if you buy soil in bulk, it's going to be a little cheaper, so it's cost $4.50 per cubic foot, and then there's sales tax. And so we just want the total cost. So our goal here is to figure out the total cost. So there's our goal. So I'm just going to make a note. We're given, and for my givens, I'm going to actually draw a picture. So we have a garden. Oops. Here's my garden. It's 9 feet by 18 feet, and it's 1 foot deep. Oops, that was supposed to be a 1 foot over there, and it didn't write. So let's erase that and go back to the marker, 1 foot. But we're not filling it all the way. We're gonna fill 93%. And then we know the cost is $4.50 per cubic foot. And then we got tax at 7.8%. Okay, so I need to figure out the volume of my rose garden. I need then 93% of that volume, and then I can take my cubic foot measure, calculate the cost, and then calculate the tax. So that's sort of my plan of action. So let's start with the volume. So we have a rectangular prism, and when we're finding the volume of a rectangular prism, a friendly reminder, the volume is just going to be your length times your width times your height. And so in this case, we have 18 times 9 times 1 would be our volume. And so I can go over to my calculator, and I'm going to clear everything out. So I have 18 times 9. And so that's 162. Notice I didn't bother timesing by 1 because what's really the point? You know, timesing by 1 and timesing by and not multiplying, it's not really going to make a difference. So that's how many cubic feet if you filled it to the top. So that's step 1. I figured out just sort of how much can that rectangular garden hold. But that's not really what I want. I only want it filled 93%. So step 2 here, I'm going to take 93% of that 162. And so remember when I mentioned earlier with our percents, I'm basically going to take that total and then times it by 93 out of 100, or 0.93. And so let's go over to my calculator, and in my next row I'm going to take 162 times 0.93, and notice, okay, 150.66. So we want the amount of soil, I'm going to call this, of soil would be 150.66 cubic feet is how much we're going to buy. And since we're buying it in bulk, we can buy fractions of a cubic foot. That's always something to consider. If you're buying a pack of something, I can't break open the pack. But if I'm buying it in bulk, I can. So I can do the fraction. Though, let's just argue that maybe I spill some soil. So I'm actually going to purchase 151 cubic feet, and I think I'm pretty justified in making that argument because, well, you just never know. And opening the bag, I dumped some soil, and oh my goodness, now I don't have enough soil in my garden. So I did the 151, and then I'm going to times that by 450 because that's sort of the cost per cubic foot, and that would get me a total amount of money as $679.50. So this is my subtotal. This is my pre-tax amount. So subtotal pre-tax. Now, tax is going to be similar to how we dealt with the tile problem. So we don't want just 7.8%. We actually want 100% plus the 7.8% when we figure out the new cost. So you could figure out the cost of tax separately, and often on your receipts, that's how it's listed. But for me, if I know I'm just looking for the total price, I find it simpler to just do it all at once, which means I'm going to take that $679.50. This is, you know, my step 4. And I'm just going to times it by 1.078. This would be 107.8%, or the 100% plus the 7.8%. And if I put that into my calculator, I would end up with a total cost of $732.50. And so we can check that just quickly in our calculator. So if I took my, 679.50 and I times that 1.078, $732.50. And this would be my total cost. So in order to fill the garden with 93% fill of soil, Sean is going to need to spend $732.50 on soil. It actually can be pretty expensive to fill a garden from scratch with soil. These numbers aren't that unrealistic. So hopefully watching this video gives you a sense of how to tackle problems 1 through 3 on this practice worksheet. Stay tuned for future videos and where I look at solving some of the other problems in this practice.